Hello, this is Joellen Trilling. Even if you don't do any kind of exercise, I hope that this year, in November, you will exercise your right to vote. It's no secret that your vote counts. Thank you.
Recording just to get, I guess, B-roll. There's a lot of judgment calls that people ask me to make about like what Byron would think about certain things. We think a lot of these are buried like on in federally protected parks, and people wonder, would Byron do that? Would he go into this park and dig a hole and then expect people 40 years later to go and tear up this park? And I don't really know Byron, so I don't know how to answer that.
I'm just trying to imagine Byron digging.
Yeah, apparently on his and Sandy's first date, they were in San Francisco, and he had to leave the date early so he could bury one of these.
Really?
So
Wow.
yeah, so there's we think this is all sort of speculative, but we think there's one in San Francisco. There's one in Houston, Texas, New Orleans, St. Augustine, Florida, Charleston, South Carolina, Roanoke, North Carolina. There was one in Chicago and one in Cleveland. Those have both been found. One in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, one somewhere in New York, and one in Montreal.
Oh. How many have been found?
Two. One was found in 1984, and one was found in 2004.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy. So my thing was like I said, there's a couple of people involved in the hunt that got to talk to Byron that had sort of a friendly relationship with him. Mm-hmm. But other than that, we don't know much about the man, and we spend so much time sort of poring over all of his work that I thought it might be a good idea to just talk to someone who was a friend of his, so we could get more of an idea of what Byron was like as a person.
Yeah, well, we were pretty close. We both met our future wives, I think, either the same day or the same week. And I was trying to remember where we first met. It had to have been at a comic book convention, but I don't know if it was at the 1972 EC convention or if it was at Comic-Con. It might have been. It seems more likely that it was Comic-Con, but very early on.
So should we call you Bill or William?
Yeah, just call me Bill. Are we going to upset people if we start early like this?
No.
Okay. So is it live or is it? Are you going to edit it?
No, it's not live. We're going to edit it.
Oh, okay.
And what I'll do is I'll just in case you want, I'll shoot you a copy before it gets published so that you can make sure everything's okay. Like I don't want to. I know another thing that John Palancar was sort of irritated with is he's done interviews in the past, and especially talking about Byron, he gets kind of choked up, and the interviews sort of play into that with drama and make him seem.
Yeah, I was pretty much a basket case at Byron's memorial at Comic-Con.
Yeah, I read something about that, but God, if I could find those recordings, those that would be amazing to see.
Have you talked to Sandy?
I have not. Sandy has asked. I've sent a couple of emails back and forth, but for the most part, I think Sandy and the kids, we sort of show them the respect of sort of leaving them alone.
Yeah.
The treasure hunting community gets a little crazy, like I said, with people showing up at John's house and just calling him out of the blue. We 100% don't want that to happen to Sandy.
Right.
I mean, Ben was on the podcast, and then people started, blowing up his email. Can't really find his phone numbers, luckily. And in fact, if that ever happens, if people start just shooting you emails about the treasure hunt, forward them to me and I'll take care of it, or just tell them, know anything about it.
I know nothing about it.
All right. So let me do a little intro here. A second. Welcome to the Secret Podcast. This is George Ward. I'm here with John Hardapy, and we have a bit of a special guest today. Byron Preiss was a bit of a legend to those of us in the secret community. We pore over his words and we tear through his books, trying to get a small glimpse of the man behind the page. What were his motivations? What were his hopes, his dreams, his goals? Why did he think ducks honked instead of geese? I've spent many years talking to people who admire Byron, but the last 2 years, I've begun talking to people who knew him, people from Ben Asen to John Palancar, and they've all said the same thing. If you want to know who Byron was, talk to William Stout. The exact quote I was actually given was, "I don't know a single person closer to or that Byron admired more than Bill." You may not know William Stout by name, but you know his work. Bill's worked on films like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Conan, Predator, Men in Black, Pan's Labyrinth, Masters of the Universe. Bill has a passion for dinosaurs and paleontological art. He published The Dinosaurs, A Fantastic New View of a Lost Era, as well as one of my favorite childhood books, The Little Blue Brontosaurus, which received the 1984 Children's Choice Award with Byron. His art's been featured at the Smithsonian, the British Museum, the Royal Ontario Museum, and the American Museum of Natural History. Bill has camped in Antarctica, climbed volcanoes, designed theme parks, worked with people like Jack Kirby and Robert Crumb and Harvey Kurtzman, Steven Spielberg, and he's graciously taking the time out of his day to talk to us about his friend Byron. So thank you, Bill, for being here with us.
Oh, you're welcome. Happy to talk about Byron, who's like a brother to me.
So you were saying you were saying earlier you couldn't remember if you met Byron at a Comic-Con or at an EC Comics convention.
Right. If it was an EC Comics convention, it would have been in 1972 because that's when I was working with Kurtzman and Elder on Little Annie Fanny. But it seems more likely that it was probably one of the early Comic-Cons in San Diego.
Now, did you guys meet through a business thing, or were you just two, people being represented at the convention?
I think Byron saw my work and liked it, and we immediately began to talk about collaborating.
What was the first thing you guys collaborated on? I remember there was a comic that you did. It wasn't the Kurtzman comic?
Well, I know one of the early things we did. We were both gigantic Beach Boys fans, and so I contributed to the Illustrated Beach Boys biography. He got a number of different artists to each to illustrate a song, including Harvey Kurtzman, and the song I did was 409. And then when Byron came out, one of the times he came out to LA, we both went to a Beach Boys concert because he had that connection, and we were able to get backstage after the show. So that was pretty cool.
I heard a story once that you're the first American painter that was featured in Heavy Metal magazine.
Yeah, that might be true.
I heard a story that you were featured there because Byron gave your work to the magazine in exchange for advertising.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, and I didn't get any money.
What could he, just advertising in general, or was he advertising anything specific?
It was, well, the story that we're talking about was a Harlan Ellison story. Byron and I were very close to Harlan. And this was for the illustrated Harlan Ellison graphic novel book. Not really a graphic novel, but a collection of short stories, each story illustrated by a different artist. And it wasn't really done so much comic book style as EC Pictofiction style. For those not familiar with EC Pictofiction, that was blocks of text with heavily illustrated by comic book art. And so that was the way the illustrated Harlan Ellison was done. The story I did was a story called Shattered Like a Glass Goblin. It was about a guy who was Section 8'd out of the Army. This is during the Vietnam War, and he comes back to LA to rejoin the people that he was living with before he got drafted. And they're in this old sort of Victorian house in Los Angeles, and the other people are heavily into drugs, and he starts to get into drugs, and things start to really change and get weird. So that story, by the way, was responsible for getting me hired doing artwork for the first Conan the Barbarian movie. Ron Cobb really wanted me to work on the film with him, but he had a deal with John Milius, the writer-director, and that was John had veto power over anybody that Ron wanted to bring into the art department, and vice versa. Ron had veto power over anybody that Milius wanted to bring into the art department. So Ron asked me if I would leave my portfolio with Milius, and I thought it might be interesting to learn how films are made. And so I went to the Conan offices, and Milius happened to be there. And so I handed my book to him. He flipped through it, and when he got to that story, his eyes lit up. It was a favorite story of his. He remembered reading it in Heavy Metal. And then he handed me back my book, and John's a sort of bigger than life character. And as he got to the doorway over his shoulder, he barked, "Hire him." So I went in to see Buzz Feitchens, the line producer. He told me what I would be making on Conan, and I nearly fell off the chair laughing because it was about 10% of what I was making in advertising at the time. But I thought it might be interesting to see how films were made.
So one of the problems that I've had, I've done quite a bit of research into you, but one of the problems that into you, Bill, but one of the problems that I've had is there's not a lot of information about you and Byron. There's not a lot of, I guess because it was sort of a lot of that interaction, at least with publishing or in business, was before the internet. It was before, so it's not really,
it's not really written down anywhere.
Yeah. Could you sort of give us an idea of sort of how did you and Byron work together? What projects what projects did you guys work together on?
Let's see. Well, in all my work, I pretty much insist on a lot of freedom. And Byron was willing to give me that. One of the things that I really admired about Byron, he was constantly pushing the envelope and testing or just trying to do different things with the medium of comics. And illustrated Harlan Ellison was one thing. He did some educational autobiographies for kids, like he got Harvey Kurtzman to write an autobiography for kids. We did the Ray Bradbury's Dinosaur Tales together. I did the cover and I illustrated Sound of Thunder, and then he got different artists, including Overton Lloyd and Jim Steranko, to illustrate the other stories, and Mobius. And let's see, he was always trying to do different things with comics, which I just really admired him for that, because some stuff would fail, some stuff wouldn't, some stuff would be highly successful. But the fact that he took that chance, that really impressed me.
Yeah, he got a lot of flack when he first started doing the graphic novels because he did it in a completely different format, right? It was
right,
like you were saying, the pictorial novel kind of thing, as opposed to what's it called? The spread of comics that you're used to now. There were no speech bubbles, for
right,
instance, in his. And that's something that I've heard a lot about Byron. In addition to pushing the envelope of whatever project he was in, he tended to surround himself with newer people in those fields, like the sort of the newer upcoming artists, the people who he knew were going to be great. I think Palancar was telling me that he would just take interns that he could see potential in people. So he would just take interns and send them off on their own projects.
Well, part of that was that in many ways, Byron was similar to my friend Roger Corman.
Mm-hmm.
Roger Corman gave lots of young filmmakers their first break, just the way Byron did in comics. And they both had the same reason. New guys were inexpensive.
I guess that is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's weird. It's weird that it seems like the people that Byron surrounded himself became some of the more successful people that the general public knows about. You know,
well, he definitely had an eye for talent.
Yeah. It's that circle of people, the National Lampoon, Heavy Metal, the artists that he worked with, they're all amazing talents in their own field now. But back then, you know, they weren't so well known.
But on the other hand, he would get a lot of big name talent as well, like Jim Steranko and Mobius.
Yeah, that is true.
So I'll tell you how the dinosaur book came about. We had already done a number of projects together, and Byron was in Los Angeles visiting me, and he was at my studio, at a studio on La Brea, not far from the tar pits. And I had done a whole bunch of illustrations for a friend's book. His friend was Don Glut. Don Glut had written a book called The Dinosaur Dictionary, and there had been so many new dinosaurs found. Don decided it was time to revise the book. And his goal was to have at least one image per listing. And he asked me if I would do 4 pictures, and that 4 turned into 44. And while Byron was visiting, he said, Bill, if you could do your own book on anything, what would you do? Now, I thought he was just being conversational. I didn't realize that was a serious question on his part. And I really didn't have an answer. And he looked and he saw all these dinosaur dictionary pictures laying around my studio. And he said, oh, would you like to do one on dinosaurs? I said, sure, yes, that'd be fun. Forgot about it. 2 months later, I get a phone call from Byron. Bill, we got our book deal. Bantam Books wants to do your dinosaur book. I suddenly had this gigantic project dropped in my lap. And while I was doing the dinosaur dictionary pictures, I thought, this may be the only image of this creature that the public ever gets to see, so it better be accurate. So I started working from the skeletons and contacting the paleontologists who had actually discovered the animals. And this was before email, so I had to snail mail my sketches back and forth until we were both happy. And I also began studying paleobotany because the plants had to be accurate as well. Well, while I was doing the dinosaur book, the main impetus for doing that book was not just to do a dinosaur book, but because I was privy to all kinds of knowledge in the field of paleontology that wasn't getting to the public yet. It was just sort of slowly but surely trickling down. I was part of a loose group called the Dinosaur Society of Los Angeles, and if there was a visiting paleontologist in town, that person would end up as our guest speaker. So through all these incredible guest speakers, I was finding out that dinosaurs weren't slow, they weren't stupid, they were fast, they took care of their young, a lot of them had feathers. And I thought this book would be ideal for putting all of this new information about dinosaurs together in one package for the public. And so after we got our book deal, I started to do the illustrations. And as I was doing them, I was concerned that if I did them on all the same style, that the public would be bored and perhaps I would be bored in the process. So I started imagining what would it look like if Andrew Wyeth did a dinosaur painting. And so I would do one in the style of Andy Wyeth. What would it look like if N.C. Wyeth did a dinosaur painting? What would it look like if Mobius did dinosaurs? And so I was experimenting with all these different styles. At that time, I had a reputation in Los Angeles as the guy who could duplicate any style. And that was some of the work that I got. My very first movie poster was a film called Spies. The original poster was done by Rick Meyerowitz, the National Lampoon cartoonist. And it starred Elliot Gould, Donald Sutherland, and an actress named Zuzu. Well, he had blown the caricatures of Elliot Gould and Zuzu, and he refused to change them. So they sent the poster back to Los Angeles. They called me up, and they said, we need you to redraw Elliot Gould and Zuzu, but in Rick's style, and but make it look like them. And so I did. That was my very first movie poster.
So something that I love about dinosaurs, the dinosaurs book that you did with Byron, when I remember dinosaur books from when I was a kid, they were emotionless. You saw like the illustrators would illustrate a Tyrannosaurus Rex from the side.
Right. Just straight portraits.
Yeah. And these illustrations were really sort of, I think they were the first glimpse kids had into the life of dinosaurs, how dinosaurs interacted with each other, how they interacted as a family. And that's something that I kind of admire about your work, especially in this book. Was that important to you when you were
That was really important to me. I did not want to do a catalog of dinosaur portraits. I thought that would be incredibly dull. And it wouldn't honor the dinosaurs. There had been so much new information being found out about them. I was really intrigued by their lifestyle and speculating on how they lived, how they mated, what kind of stuff they ate, even how they pooped.
Well, I mean, it's funny, but that's important information to know, and it's important to be able to put that sort of their lives into a context.
Oh, yeah, I agree. So originally, I think the goal that was set by Bantam was I think there was about 30 color illustrations and 20 black and white, and I started to trick them. I would do the black and white illustrations in full color, and they'd get them. They go, "Whoa, we can't print this in black and white. It's gorgeous. I said, okay. So by doing that over and over and over, I got the numbers up to about 80 color plates and about 50 black and white illustrations. So that was my wily little plan that succeeded. And as the pictures were coming in, Bantam kept upping the first printing numbers. I think originally the first printing was going to be 2,000 copies. And by the time it went to publication, it was 250,000. They really believed in that book, thank God. And
not so much in The Secret. I think they went to 25,000.
Wow.
Yeah, that book was nothing.
Yeah.
This kind of leads me into the second book, though. You guys also did Little Blue Brontosaurus. Now,
right.
This book has a bit of the story of how this book came about has kind of a sad ending with what happened to the property. But
Yeah.
how did this book come about? I know there's really only one or two interviews that we have of Byron, but from those interviews, it's very obvious that his passion was children and getting children to read through comic books, through electronic, through ebooks, or through just children's books. So was it just his passion of children plus your passion of dinosaurs that brought this book together, or was there a plan?
Well, that's the side of Byron that I really loved. In many respects, he was an extremely charitable guy, and he was passionate about getting kids to read. Also, with every book that we did, he would also issue a Braille edition so that there'd be an edition for the blind as well. And I thought that was a wonderful thing, wonderful policy that he had. So we co-wrote the Little Blue Brontosaurus, and then I did the layouts and painted the cover and designed the characters and did a few of the interior pieces, but the bulk of the story art was done by Don Morgan over my layouts. Don at the time was ghosting Pogo, the Walt Kelly strip. So he was, for style-wise, it was ideal because I wanted that really sort of Disney-esque, Walt Kelly-esque style for the book. Unfortunately, the book was published by Cadman. Now, that was Cadman's very first book. Prior to that, basically, they were a spoken record company. And so there is a record, too, that you can get of a Little Blue Brontosaurus. But because it was their first book, they sort of dropped the ball when it came to distribution and a number of things. Here's a book that won the Children's Choice Award for 1984, and I couldn't find it in any bookstores.
Oh yeah, it's
and it
very
was
rare
even difficult to special order as well. So it was incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I've got a copy of this signed by Byron, but I also have my copy from when I was a kid. I mean, not to just not just because you're on the podcast. This was one of my favorite books when I was a kid. So thank you for the illustrations are amazing. The illustration that I love more than any, there's a black and white of Blue hiding beside the Stegosaurus. And when I was a kid, it was my favorite. I don't know. I love it.
That's cool. Well, yeah, you might be happy to know I wrote a sequel. I kept pushing Byron to write a sequel, or at least begin the second book. And I think he was just so busy with so many projects. I finally got tired of waiting, and I just wrote the sequel myself. It was called Little Blue's Big Race, and I also did a full color cover for it.
Is it out or?
No, it never came out. I'm hoping to put it out eventually because I still am a big believer in that project.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it was a beloved book to so many people. The people that could get it. Because right now, I mean, I don't know if you've looked, but if you go on Amazon or eBay, it's nuts.
Wow. Yeah, I've seen it for 200.
Wow. Okay.
The guy who's got the most of them, he scours the country for them when he travels, is Stuart Ing of Stuart Ing Books. He's usually got about 3 to 6 copies in his shop.
So this book ended badly. It was, I don't know if you can say this, so I'll say it. Basically the concept and the art was kind of taken from you and used to make Land Before Time.
That's correct. And to put salt in the wounds, uh, Lucas and Spielberg hired me to do some of the advertising for The Land Before Time.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah.
I hear.
I love irony, except when it happens to me.
Yeah. I hear that Byron wanted to sue George Lucas
Yes.
and Steven Spielberg over this. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, he did. Now, I don't think Lucas was aware of my book. I think it was all Steven, because uh, when I started in the film business with Conan, our receptionist was Kathleen Kennedy, and Steven Spielberg's office was right across from my office. So Ron Cobb and I would work on Conan during the day, and then just jump across the hall to Steven's office and kick around ideas for his next film project, which was Raiders of the Lost Ark. And within 2 months of my being there, Kathy became John Millis's personal assistant. And about 2 months after that, she was Steven Spielberg's personal assistant. And within 2 years, she produced E.T.
Kind of a step up.
So
Yeah.
incredibly fast ride. But a producer friend of mine was visiting Kathy at her office, and he saw the little blue brontosaurus on her desk. So there's no doubt that they were aware of my book. But the problem was, I was working in the film business. Well, to sue Spielberg would be career suicide.
Yeah, that's a death note right there.
I knew we would win because it was clearly stolen from us, but it was just one of those things.
You would lose in the long term, definitely.
Yep. And since then, I've done a lot of work for Spielberg, so that never would have happened if I had sued him.
And I'm sure that topic never comes up in conversation.
No.
So I've got to ask, what was it? You did the storyboards for Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
I did some of them. I just did a handful to help Steven out. I was working on the sequence where India's fighting the Nazi on the truck.
Oh.
And it became pretty clear to me I really needed to just focus on Conan. I couldn't do both films at once. And so I recommended a really good friend of mine to take over for me. That was Dave Stevens, the creator of The Rocketeer.
Mm-hmm.
So Dave ended up doing the storyboards for Raiders of the Lost Ark. And then a couple of years later, I gave Dave another great job. John Landis called me up. He wanted me to storyboard Michael Jackson's Thriller. And I was just, up to my ears in work. There's no way I could squeeze that in. So again, I recommended Dave, and Dave storyboarded Thriller for John Landis, and then Michael Jackson really fell in love with Dave's art, and so Michael started to hire Dave for a lot of other projects as well.
So you're just completely out of left field here. Your relationship with Byron, you guys were very close. You've described yourself as brothers.
We were really close, and it was a really rocky relationship, I got to tell you.
I've heard that from a lot of people who work with Byron. On the business side, it gets a little rocky, but It seems like he knew how to keep his professional life separate from his business life.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Personally, we were best of friends.
Yeah.
But business-wise, I would have huge blow-up fights with the guy. Because, typically, here's the way Byron didn't want to pay hardly anything to any of the artists. That's no secret. He was very tight with the dollar. But the way he would get people to work for him, he would offer you a dream project that you would go, oh my God, I would almost do that for free. Well, if you're working for Byron, you almost did do it for free. But it was always this incredible enticement. I remember, both Byron and I were huge fans of Mobius, and I was really pleased and surprised to learn that Byron was doing an Art of Mobius book. And he sent me a copy of the limited edition after it was published. And I went through it, and I immediately saw that entire signature, I think it was 16 pages, were missing from the book. That, they were in the softcover edition, the regular edition, but not in the hardcover limited edition. And I called him up and I said, Byron, you just gave new meaning to the word limited. And Byron said, I know. He said, I just thank God it wasn't one of your books. I would have torn him a new one, but Mobius is a much kinder, gentler person than I am.
So yeah, I've heard this about, but like this is, you're right. It's not a secret that Byron was a little bit stingy when it came to money. And it's also not a secret that he gave people their dream jobs. what?
Boy, and that dinosaur book, that really launched me in the world of paleontology. I'll be forever grateful for that. It really put me on the map as one of the leading paleo artists. And while I was in the middle of doing the book, of course, the deadline was looming, and eventually I didn't have time to ape other people's styles. And so I just started producing. And out of that came my own style, because previous to that dinosaur book, I really didn't have my own style. I would just adapt. If I choose a style that I thought would best solve the problem that was presented to me. But so I was really happy to see that my own style emerged out of that intense amount of work.
Yeah. If you were to show me the dinosaur book and then show me the cover of Coven 13 and say this is the same artist, I would call you a liar.
Yeah.
It's just two completely different.
Right. And even in Coven 13, when I was doing the black and white interiors, I was working in different styles. I did one that was like a Brad Holland style picture, and it was there's actually I was the first to illustrate a Harlan Ellis story called Rock God, and I don't know if I had just worked with Jack Kirby or just was really into Jack's work, but I did a sort of a Kirby-esque illustration for that.
Do you have a favorite story of Byron personally? I know you guys got together quite a bit. I read that like after every Comic-Con he would buy you dinner, and do you have a favorite story of a time you guys were together?
Boy, well, it's not a very interesting story, but I think it was the last time, or at least one of the last times that we were together. Byron and Sandy all stayed at the oh gosh, the hotel with the polo lounge. Was that the Beverly Hills Hotel or the Bel Air? Anyway, it was a very luxurious hotel. And one of our last conversations was he noticed that I had started publishing, and so he just barraged me with all this incredible publishing advice that he had garnered over the years, and that was I was amazed. He was treating me in a different way. Our sort of brother relationship. Sometimes I was the big brother, sometimes he was the little brother, and sometimes it was vice versa. We were constantly in touch with each other and giving each other advice, and alerting each other to things that we thought the other guy would like. We were also, we got married around the same time. Our wives knew each other and liked each other, and then we both started having kids, and so I remember for one of his daughters, I don't think it was her birthday. I think it was her bat mitzvah. I gave her an original dinosaur illustration.
Speaking of that, was Byron was very religious.
Yes,
from what we're told. He went to synagogue.
And he was sort of a what I would call a classic good Jew, in that he seemed to take on the worries and the troubles of the world. I mean, I'd be with him in Manhattan. We'd pass a newsstand, and he read the headline of some disaster, and he would take it very personally, even though he didn't know anybody involved. He just had a very big, empathetic heart.
Right.
And his father was involved in getting Siegel and Schuster paid in regards to Superman.
It blows my mind, this little book, and I know you don't really know much about it, but all of the stories that we hear about the book, The Secret, that he published, it seems less like a job for Byron. It seemed like he wanted to do a cool project with a bunch of friends. So he literally got a bunch of his friends together to do this project. And like I was saying before, that circle of friends and the things that Byron was involved in, like the Superman lawsuit that his father helped with. It's just crazy how much Byron indirectly impacted so much of what the public now loves. Without Byron, there's no Aragon books. Without Byron, there's no little blue brontosaurus. Without Byron, Byron had his hand in so many things.
Without Byron, I wouldn't have a career as a paleo artist.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's just, I mean, so many people owe, it seems so many people owe so much to Byron.
Mhm.
Um,
He still
what,
owes me though.
oh, okay. I gotta,
He never paid me for my Oz book illustrations.
yeah, I heard, you guys did the Oz graphic novels.
Well, actually, they weren't graphic novels. They were brand new Oz novels. They were prose, and they were written by Sherwood Smith, and they were officially sanctioned by the Baum family.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So yeah, one of our dinners in Beverly Hills was with the surviving Baum family members. And so uh, the first book we did was going to be called Flying Monkeys of Oz, and then it was discovered that Michael Myers was had a regular routine on Saturday Night Live where he talked about monkeys flying out of his ass. So we couldn't use that title. So they changed it to a title that I thought was even more salacious, which was The Emerald Wand of Oz, which we began to refer to as the Emerald Schwanza of Oz. And it was a strange situation because Byron sent me the manuscript. And I read. I'm a huge Oz fan. I have every single Oz first edition in my collection. And I read the novel, and it was just awful. It was written by someone who had no idea of what Oz was, had no idea of what the charm of Oz was, or how an Oz book should be written. And I was just furious. And I wrote a blistering, I think it was probably about a 12-page letter detailing every atrocity in the novel. And a few months later, he sent me another one. He said, I had it rewritten, and I couldn't believe it was like day and night. It was absolutely brilliant, and it was so dead on and spot on as an Oz book. I couldn't believe it was by the same person, and I found out later it wasn't by the same person. I don't know who he got to write that first one, but it wasn't Sherwood Smith because I ran into Sherwood Smith. We were both guests at the San Diego Comic Fest, and that's when I found out that she had written the book that I ended up illustrating, The Emerald Wand of Oz. And she also wrote the second book, which Trouble Under Oz. And so those were for HarperCollins. HarperCollins paid me. They didn't pay me directly, though. They paid the money to Byron. Byron was supposed to pay me. He didn't pay me. He used that money to do something else. And so I never got paid on those books. And the third book I was going to do as a tribute to Byron. And I was really going to knock myself out and do my absolute best, most elaborate Oz pictures. But since I didn't get paid on the second book, I didn't, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And then obviously HarperCollins, in their minds, well, they had paid me, so they weren't going to pay me again. So the third book just sort of dissolved into the vapors.
Well, we're Byron and you obviously share a lot of loves. Byron
Yeah.
seemed to be passionate about music. Did you share
Yeah.
the same sort of passions?
Oh, I'm nuts about music. I wrote a book called Legends of the Blues. It's 100 portraits of my favorite blues musicians born prior to 1930, and then I wrote all the biographies inside the book. Byron and I, as I said, Byron and I were both gigantic Beach Boys fans.
Yeah. I actually own that book and the Crumb book before it. So it was
Oh, cool. Yeah, I did all
yeah.
the guys that Robert didn't draw.
Yeah.
And before I did the book, I got Robert's blessing on the book because I told him, I said, if you consider this your turf, I'll drop it like a hot potato. But he got back to me and said, I can't wait to see what you do.
I would love to just know what it's like to be able to just call Robert Crumb and be like, "Hey, can I do that?"
Well, watch the Crumb documentary. That's a really good portrait of Robert.
Oh yeah, I've seen it. It's
Yeah.
great. Do you know anything about Byron's taste in music? Do you know what he liked, what he didn't like?
Other than Beach Boys, he turned me on to the Rubinoos.
I don't think I know the
I
Rubinoos.
think they're an East Coast band. They're very power pop. Oh, and when he would come to LA, I'd take him to shows. I took him to see Oingo Boingo. I took him to see my old band, the Heaters, and he was knocked out by the Heaters. He didn't like Oingo Boingo. I think it was a little too harsh for him. But he loved power pop. He loved stuff with good melodies.
Huh. Do you know?
I think the root of the song he turned me on to is "I Want to Be Your Boyfriend."
Something that we sort of struggle with because we didn't know him. We don't know his motivations. We don't know the things that inspired him. Do you know if Byron had any specific inspirations? What art? Do you know what artists he was inspired by? What authors?
Well, I know he loved comics, and
Mm-hmm.
as far as authors go, he was crazy about Harlan Ellison and crazy about Ray Bradbury. It was Byron who directly introduced me to Ray Bradbury, which I'll also be forever grateful for because Ray and I became really good, close friends. And so those were two writers he admired enormously. And then he liked a lot of the better comic book artists as well. And then I turned him on to a lot of the early children's book illustrators of the 20th century. Uh, People like Arthur Rackham, Edmund Dulac, the Detmold brothers. Often I would come to New York to the big antiquarian book fair and go with Byron, and I'd buy loads of these fantastic illustrated books. And then he would do the same. We'd go together when it was in LA and just add to our collection.
Hmm. I guess tying back into the book we're interested about. Do you know if Byron was inspired by puzzles in any way? Do you know if he? Well, I guess we're what I'm trying to figure out, and what we're all trying to figure out, is this book that he wrote, The Secret, is so strange. It's different. And no one really knows what inspired him to do it, and it's such a huge project to take on.
Yeah.
And sort of out of left field, like, let's just make a big puzzle. Generally, people who are really into those sort of things are the people who take on those projects. So it's always been a big question of what inspired Byron. How would he even come up with this idea? What inspired him to make it?
I would guess that it's probably slightly related to another project we did together. Byron did a whole series of books called the Time Machine books, which were very similar to the Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Mm-hmm.
I illustrated covers to, I think, about 6 of them. And they gave you the opportunity to read a book, 24 different ways, depending upon which path you decided to take when you're given a choice.
Right.
So to me, that tells me that he had a sort of a fun gaming puzzle sensibility that was at least partially indicated by that series of books.
Yeah, I think John Palancar illustrated a couple of those. There was something about images that you could move around, and one image would make multiple different images that he was telling me about once. But I've never been able to physically hold those books. I've never seen them before. They sound very interesting.
Yeah, they were cool. I mean, one of the paleo artists I admire the most is a guy I turned Byron on to, Doug Henderson. And Doug illustrated the 2 different dinosaur books that I did the covers for, or the prehistoric life books that I did the cover for. And I think he had, since Doug's style didn't lend itself to reproduction on cheap pulp paper like a paper book would have, he got Alex Nino to ink Doug's drawings. And so that was a great combo because Alex is a fantastic line man, and Doug Henderson is one of the most cinematic of the dinosaur artists.
Do you? So I read in one of your blog posts that you went you like you said, you both met your wives at about the same time. You had to both approve of each other's wives.
Right.
You went through all of his children's lives. You both experienced sort of life together.
Yeah.
Is there a specific moment in Byron's life that's that's touching to you? Or
I loved that when we're outside of business, he was an incredibly generous guy. You usually be the guy that took me out to dinner, and then when I would be in New York, he was members in the Friars Club, so we would work out together, and sometimes have dinner at the Friars Club together. And when he was here, I'd try to do the same for him, but usually he would end up taking me out. Harlan used to say, "The publishers always have to pay."
I guess let me see if I can rephrase. Um, it's obvious that Byron loved his friends.
Yeah.
Um, it seems like he was also a family man. What was Byron like as a? How did you see Byron as a father?
Well, he was very kind and thoughtful when it came to his daughters. He just thought the world of his daughters and of Sandy too. Sandy was a very strong person. She's a publicist, a really top go-getter publicist. She did some of the publicity for the dinosaur book. So did her boss, and and I just thought the girls were just fantastic. They really tickled me, and I loved being around them and watching them grow up. I would love to see them now because I haven't seen them in so many years. They're not girls anymore; they're young women.
Yeah, I hear they're pretty accomplished. Like I said, we tend to leave
That
them
wouldn't
alone, so we
surprise
haven't.
me at all
Yeah,
that they're
they're
accomplished.
they're on the episode of Expedition Unknown that's about the secret. I don't know if you've seen it, but if you're interested, I have a link. I can send it to you. You can watch it. It's got Sandy and both the girls in it.
Huh, wow. Oh, yeah, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I'll email you a link to it.
Sure. Sandy used to tease Byron when I found the Atkins diet and I lost about 30 pounds. She started teasing Byron that he should follow my path.
I mean, he was a kind of a tiny guy, wasn't he? I mean, he was. I hear he was tall, but kind of thin, or no?
Yeah, yeah. But over the years, he started to get a dad bod.
That's one of the. I guess one of the downsides of being a publisher is you're behind the curtains. You're like the
Yeah.
wizard from the Oz.
And
We don't.
being a successful publisher, you can afford to go out to eat.
Yeah, we don't have any. We don't have any pictures of Byron. Like we've got. I think there's maybe
Oh,
3 public pictures of Byron.
oh, he was a
Um,
handsome guy.
yeah, we've got
Yeah,
those
sort of
pictures
cross
in the.
between, I would say, cross between Matthew Broderick and Al Pacino. Yeah, those were really different days back then too. The publishing industry is like the film business, and the music industry is turned upside down. Back then, when you finished the book, your job was done, and then the book company took over, did heavy promotions. They would, like for the dinosaur book, for example, I hit every. They paid for me to go to every bookstore from here to Seattle and do signings and stuff. And that's all changed now. Now you finish the book, your job is done. Now you, as the author, have to go out and promote it on your own. That's
Was that something that Byron did a lot? Did he travel around promoting his books?
Byron traveled with me to a lot of my social engagements, and Sandy and her boss arranged for me to go on a lot of television shows, a lot of the morning TV shows, and it was pretty fun, pretty exciting.
Yeah, I remember John Palancar was telling me that Byron did a interview in Cleveland about the dinosaur book on
Mhm.
some TV show, like a morning news segment kind of thing.
Yeah. Boy, and the major coup that he pulled off was getting those 12 full color pages in Life magazine on the book. Holy cow! That was like lightning striking. That was amazing. Well, he wasn't just a publisher; he was a really good writer too. He wrote a lot of the stuff. Well, he wrote that strip for the Lampoon that Ralph Reese illustrated.
Yeah, he did the anti-advice column in some comic books. I forget the name of it.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, he's done several books. He had like a Not the Webster's Dictionary, which was
Yeah,
absolutely hilarious.
yeah.
Um,
And we co-wrote Little Blue together.
yeah, but that doesn't, those kind of books, it's odd, except for not the Webster's Dictionary. There in that book there's an epilogue that's a very long story about sort of some things Byron loved as a child. It's a
Hmm.
story about New York and a story about Gershwin and all of these different things. But aside from that and Dragon World, there's not a whole lot that allows you to take a glimpse at Byron the man. You know, there's Byron the author, the storyteller, uh, but but there's not a lot that allows you to take a glimpse inside of his life.
Right. Even though he did do a lot of publicity, but the publicity was never self-serving on his part. It was always in promotion of
Of someone else.
one of his books or someone else. Like, well, like you were just saying, I did a lot of the interviews for the dinosaur book on the West Coast, but he did a lot on the East Coast. And yeah, he made a lot of television appearances, and but it wasn't about him at all. It was always about the book.
I guess one thing, since you said that, as an aside from the podcast, we are constantly looking for media of Byron. Do you remember any interviews he gave that we could look up?
Not specifically, but most of the interviews that the two of us did were for local morning TV shows.
Yeah. And we've tracked some of those down, and they're all owned by like NBC and CBS, and they all charge like $50 a second for the footage. It's crazy.
Oh my God.
You people in the film and movie business, it's crazy. Yeah.
I hate that they gouge like that, because in many ways, this is a public benefit that you're performing here. You're not towing in the big bucks putting on the show.
Definitely not. And it's crazy. If you go to them and you say this is for a nonprofit thing, even when we went and said this is for a charitable thing, no, they didn't budge. $50 a second, no transcripts, no nothing. It's nuts.
Yeah. It's funny, when I did the blues portraits, originally I wanted to do them as trading cards, and I contacted Dennis Kitchen, who is my old friend but also Robert Crumb's agent. And he said, Bill, do you notice anything unusual about Robert's choices? I said, yeah, he did the really ancient guys like Son House. He said, yep, public domain.
Yeah.
He said, you're going to have to track down each of these musicians or their families or their estates and get their permission, and probably have to pay them because trading cards are considered commercial exploitation. So I said, well, I guess I just did them for myself. He said, would you consider doing them as a book? And I said, well, wouldn't I run into the same problem? He said, no, a book is considered a benefit to the public. It's not considered exploitation like T-shirts or posters or prints.
Yeah, I think you were saying that in another interview where you were going to put together a collection of your works. I think it was on a Masters of the Universe podcast where you couldn't publish just Masters of the Universe posters, but you were going to put them all in a book because you were able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, different rules for books, thank God.
So Byron met a couple of the hunters, a couple of the people who found, the two groups that found treasures from the secret. One was in Chicago, one was in Cleveland. Byron met with both of them. And there's a couple of weird things. Was Byron's mother his secretary? Do you know? I know that's an odd question.
Might have been.
Yeah?
It wouldn't surprise me at all.
I think Byron's mom yelled at one of them once, and they were always curious if it was actually Byron's mom. But the second group that met him in 2004 said that he was he was overjoyed that his book had sort of carried on this legacy. And now this book was published 40 years ago.
Wow.
How do you think, and it's got a cult following. Our Facebook group's thousands of members. The podcast gets hundreds of listens per episode per day. It's the crazy amount of fans of this book. How do you think Byron would feel about that, knowing that this little, what seems to be a pet project, because it's something he never did again. He never sort of dipped his feet into the treasure hunting world again. But how do you think he would feel that this little pet project has gained such a following 40 years later?
Oh, I think he'd be totally elated. He loved all the projects that he did, whether they were successful or not, because I think he enjoyed the process of creation. He enjoyed the process of working with the writers and the artists. And so each project he did had a personal meaning for him. And so I know with the dinosaur book, we were amazed by the reception that book got. And I think he would have been amazed by the reception of the book that you're talking about as well. I think he'd be really happy, really pleased.
Yeah, it's just, it's insane to me that this little book that, like I said, didn't even sell 25,000 copies. It did not make its money back. Has such a following now. You
Huh.
can't buy this book you can't buy it online anymore. Like
Wow.
it's nuts that this little thing that a group of people did, just a group of friends did, has developed this sort of legacy.
And those prizes are still out there.
Yeah. Well, at least 10 of them
After
are.
40 years. That's really amazing.
Well, we hope. A lot of things have changed. A lot of parks have changed. There's a lot of maintenance. I think that's the one of the big problems within the community that they don't necessarily understand about Byron is where. So most of these seem to be practically solved. It's just I don't know if you've ever even if someone were to throw a key in your backyard and tell you exactly where it is in your backyard and tell you to go, dig the key up or whatever. Digging that hole, if you're a millimeter off when you're digging the hole, you're practically a mile away. You'll never find it. So most of these are practically solved. They seem to be, but they haven't been found. And a lot of what people have problems with is the parks that they're in are now federally protected, or monuments that are in the puzzles have been removed. And people wonder if Byron would have had the forethought, would he have thought 40 years later, maybe these clues aren't going to be around anymore. And if I could find out one thing about Byron, it would be that. Did he put that much thought into his projects? Did he think about how the projects would live over time, or how they would evolve? Any of his projects? Or was he more of a, let's do this passion project and put it out, and how the audience receives it is how the audience receives it?
Well, the audience is always the missing factor in any creative project. It's really not complete until it goes out there, and then it's the audience who decides whether it's a hit or a miss, whether it's going to live for a long time or not. And that varies with the size of the audiences for each project as well. But I think he took each project that he did very, very seriously.
I guess it's one of those things that we'll never know. Like, you can't go back in time and climb into someone's mind and ask their motivations or, their plan.
You can't even go back in time yesterday and have a different lunch.
I don't know that I have any more specific questions for you. I really just wanted to, my whole goal was to just, like I said before, I'm asked to make a lot of judgment calls on the kind of person that Byron was and how he thought. And I can't, because I didn't know Byron. So I just really wanted to speak to someone that knew him well, to sort of find out the kind of person that he was, when the cameras were off, and when he wasn't in a suit.
Wasn't in a suit. I don't know if I ever saw Byron when he wasn't in a suit.
Yeah, I'm told he wore a suit to bed.
And he wore really nice ones too. In fact, when I was doing the TV shows to promote the dinosaurs, he would take my coat off and hand me his, so I'd look better on camera.
That was, see, stories like that to me are priceless, because it's taken it shows what Byron was like as just a person. He was, this hunt is weird in that people study this specific book, and then because the book is so vague, you kind of have to learn about the person that made it and what they were like, what inspired them. Like I said in the intro, why he thought ducks honked. You have to learn those things. So those kind of, and when you do that, you tend to elevate the person maybe higher than you should. You put them on a slightly higher pedestal than you should. And it's nice to be reminded that Byron was just a guy who, who screwed up sometimes and had fun with his family and had fun with his friends. It's nice to be reminded of that.
Yeah. Yeah, whenever I did a project with Byron, I was always wary and always waiting for the little bit of grit that was going to be, caught within the wheels of the project. There was always some irritant, and that was really a constant. He was funny that way.
I said earlier that in the intro that people might not know your name, and that was for a reason. I didn't really know your name.
Oh, I'm the hardest guy in the world to collect because I tell young artists, if you want to be famous, do the same thing over and over and over again for years.
Oh no, you're the absolute easiest person to collect, at least for me. Because while I didn't know your name, the more I researched, the more I realized I own so much stuff that you've done. My parents were not absent by any means, but they were very busy, and I was they were the kind of person who were like, sit down in front of the TV, or here's a book or here's a comic. And the more I researched about you, the more I realized how much of your work shaped my childhood and shaped who I
Oh,
am as a person. And I am deeply grateful for some of just the work you've done, from the little bit that you've done on Raiders of the Lost Ark to Masters of the Universe. You designed my favorite Skeletor.
oh, cool. Thank you. That amazingly, that is Frank Langella's favorite role of everything he's done.
Really?
Yeah.
I had to watch that movie again today. Like, I got so excited about this interview and everybody getting together, so I watched Masters of the Universe again. And
He's fantastic in that film.
but I was thinking, like, the Little Blue Brontosaurus really was my favorite book, and I really do have all of these things. Like, every time I read more about the things that you've done, it reminded me of something from my childhood, and
Wow.
it helped shape who I am. So thank you personally for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I love hearing that. As artists, we work alone in a room doing what we do. And until we have interaction with the public or the fans or go to conventions and stuff, we really never know if our stuff is touching anybody or reaching them at all. So I love getting feedback like that. I'm very thankful.